It's really no surprise that other cultures and pre-Columbian civilizations discovered the Americas prior to the arrival of Columbus in 1492. Whether we're talking about the ancient Polynesians sailing and navigating across the Pacific Ocean, founding their civilization on Rapa Nui or Easter Island, and then very clearly making contact with the pre-Columbian peoples of Peru, or whether we're talking about the Vikings sailing across the northern Atlantic and making contact in northeastern North America. Not to mention, we also find Aboriginal DNA in people of ancient South America. So very clearly and evidently, there were people before Columbus who had discovered the Americas and interacted with Native Americans. But the big blank spot here is, while the Vikings did cross the northern Atlantic, we don't really see evidence of crossing from the central Atlantic or the southern Atlantic. And this would be from civilizations such as out of the Mediterranean or out of Africa. And while there's no hard evidence of civilizations coming out of the Mediterranean or out of Africa anywhere in the Americas, such as actual cities themselves, or a great abundance found in the Native American world of resources and materials that would have come from the Mediterranean or Africa, and we almost certainly would see evidence if there was cross and continual contact, not just one-off examples of people coming from the Mediterranean or Africa into the Americas and never leaving or dying before returning home. Because in the Americas, we have things like corn and potatoes, very, very valuable crops that would have spread like wildfire throughout the old world. However, I strongly believe that we do have evidence and we do see glimpses and potentially even cameos of people who come from straight across the Atlantic in both the ancient Caribbean and the ancient Mexican world. First, we go deep into the Olmec heartland of La Venta. Now, La Venta is one of the main, I guess, metropoli or capital cities of the Olmec world, although that may be an oversimplification of its importance. La Venta seems to have been inhabited somewhere between 1400 and 400 BC. Now, in the Olmec world, dates are very gray. Nothing is quite so black and white. But between 1400 and 400 BC was essentially the height, the middle chapter of Olmec civilization. And it's here that we see an absolute explosion of megalithic artifacts being produced and being brought in and transported through a means by which we really don't quite understand from the Sierra de la Tuxtla volcanic belt about 90 kilometers northwest of La Venta. There are so many strange things about these Olmec monuments as far as what exactly the heads depict, why the heads seem to be quite literal portraits of Olmec rulers, but we also see so many other depictions of these half were-jaguar beings. Perhaps they are shamans or a ruling shamanic class of some kind. But the strangest monument, potentially the strangest monument that comes out of the Olmec world, in my opinion, is what is known as Monument 13. Now, you can see a replica of this at the La Venta Park in Villahermosa, Mexico. And in fact, I'm taking a group of you guys there in January. I'll leave a link somewhere up here for you to click on. It's one of the first artifacts or monuments that we see. And what it shows is a very clearly bearded man wearing some kind of wrap or turban around his head with some kind of waistcloth that's hanging down behind him with large boots, and he's carrying a flag. And what's very strange about this is that we see so many things on this monument that are not commonly seen in the Native American world, let alone the Olmec world. The first of which being facial hair. Nowhere in the Olmec world do we see any depictions at all of facial hair. And in fact, we actually see the Olmecs quite commonly, and I can't really think of any example of an Olmec ever depicting themselves with hair. They seem to be a completely hairless civilization, kind of like the Egyptians, to be honest with you. And nowhere else in the Native American world do we really see people growing large, thick beards. Now you have to remember, Native Americans are Asiatic people, and Asians, you don't really see them growing huge, large, thick beards in the way that you may see Anglo-Saxons or Arabs or whoever else that grow these long, thick beards. So that's peculiarity number one. The second is this turban sort of wrap on the top of his head. This is something that is not seen anywhere else in the Native American world as well, as far as I know. It seems that we have a couple of things here that indicate a person who seems to have come from somewhere far, far away. And then these tall boots that he's wearing. This is something that, as far as I can recall, in all the Native American sites that I've been to throughout the US, throughout Mexico, and throughout South America, I have not seen any examples of tall boots on anybody. And finally, the flag. Recently, I actually have seen some examples. I used to think for years that there were no examples of ancient Native American flags. That doesn't seem to be correct. About 2,000 years after the time of the Olmecs, at the height of Veracruz culture and the height of we call it the Maya ball game, but really it's the Mesoamerican ball game. It's not just the Maya participating. You have El Tajín, which is Veracruz culture, not Maya, not Teotihuacan. And then you have the Aztecs participating, and you have the Teotihuacanos participating, and even the Toltecs. It seems that during this time, there's some limited evidence to suggest that ancient Native Americans did actually have flags or banners, possibly something to do with the games, perhaps very likely something to do with the games, actually. But again, this is 2,000 years after the time of the Olmecs. During the time of the Olmecs, and even immediately afterwards, for the next 1,000 years, we do not see evidence of flags in the Native American world, and especially not the particular kind of handheld flag that this character is wearing. Now, where do flags like this come from? Well, in the old world, the very earliest we see evidence of flags are on the Nakata culture pottery vessels that come out of pre-dynastic Egypt. Now, this is 3,200 to 3,600 BC, really far back in time. And essentially what we see on these vessels are these riverboats with flags on them. And the idea behind this is that possibly the flags indicate what village or settlement, town, or maybe even city, if we're this far back in time, if there are settlements big enough to be cities, that this individual on this boat came from. It's a way to symbolize who you are and where you're from and identify yourself. And from there, it seems to spread throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and the rest of the ancient Old World until the medieval period. All of those things together indicate to me that this seems like someone who traveled from far away to be there. However, there's one more key piece of evidence. This logogram, or this early Mesoamerican glyph that is carved just next to this figure, indicates a foot. And the Olmec archaeologists themselves from Mexico indicate that this means that he is a traveler. This is often called Monument 13, the traveler. So even the Olmec archaeologists themselves say this is someone coming from someplace else, somewhere outside of the Olmec world. And then right there, the speculation is essentially the brakes are pumped and there's no more further speculation as to where exactly this man comes from. So where did he come from? So for the last 80 years, the government has been adding fluoride to our water supply on our behalf. But all of a sudden, states like Florida and Utah are passing laws to ban it, with many other states following suit. And activists like RFK have been warning us for years about the effects of excessive fluoride consumption. And the US National Toxicology Program actually admits that there is a connection between fluoride consumption and people with a lower IQ, as well as Alzheimer's and dementia. The truth is, there doesn't need to be anything added to our water. Humanity has survived for over 200,000 years from drinking naturally purified fresh water. But most of us don't have access to natural fresh water to drink from. So our only options really are cheap water filters that don't really work, or overly expensive plastic bottles. But to fix this issue, I've partnered with CovePure. CovePure is a water filtration system that sits on your countertop. You don't have to install it or call somebody to set it up for you. You just fill it up with water, plug it in, and it gets straight to work. CovePure is certified to remove up to 99.9% of impurities in your faucet water. That means fluoride, arsenic, forever chemicals, whatever it is, all of it gets filtered out and it leaves you with clean, purified drinking water. And once you've tried CovePure, you'll never go back. It's the best tasting water I've ever had. And also what I love is I can set the temperature to whatever I want it to be. It can be hot, it can be cold, it can be warm, whatever temperature I want. But right now, I think I want it cold. And look, if you like fluoride, that's great. You can use toothpaste, you can use mouthwash, you can use other fluoride rinse, but it's insane that we're forced to have fluoride put into our water on our behalf. CovePure gives you the right to choose for yourself. Click the link in the description to get $200 off your CovePure today for a limited time only. Your future self will thank you, and thank you to CovePure for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the show. In 450 BC, the Greek traveler Herodotus, he travels all around the Mediterranean world and gives us a pretty interesting history of his time and the time just prior to him. And he describes a Phoenician expedition going around the coast of Africa, down through the Red Sea, the Indian Sea, down the Cape of Africa, in the seas of South Africa, around the west coast of Africa, and back up into the Mediterranean. And in 600 BC, this was something that had never been done. And the brief glimpses that we have through the ancient sources of seafaring expeditions, well, they tended to have a high percentage of things going awry, of ships being lost, or say they send out 10 ships, perhaps 3 return, 7 were either lost at sea or they sank or got washed away in a storm of some kind. Seafaring, even all the way up into the colonial period, well into the colonial period, was extremely dangerous. Now, some people have theorized in 600 BC during this Phoenician expedition around Africa that if you drifted too far west into the Atlantic, you would be pulled by these very strong Atlantic currents right into the Bahamas, through the Caribbean, and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And in fact, there are people in modern times who have repeated these seafaring expeditions and have shown very well that it is quite possible for a Phoenician vessel to make it all the way across the Atlantic, and even speculated that they could have sailed back, although like I said earlier, we probably would have evidence of this if they did have any resources or materials from the Americas and had brought them back into and introduced them into Mediterranean civilization. Now, 600 BC in the Phoenician realm falls directly within the height of Olmec civilization. That around 600 BC, give or take, is the height, as far as we know, of the Olmec world, when they were the wealthiest, just a few centuries before the Olmec world would begin to collapse as Maya civilization and the Zapotec civilization began to rise up around the Olmecs. So I should say, and Dr. Barnhart, my good friend and mentor in his Great Courses lecture series, he also says that this is a very interesting and peculiar case here, and this traveler on Monument 13, while I cannot definitively say he is a Phoenician, the timelines do line up, and the Phoenicians certainly would have had the capability of sailing across the Atlantic. And when they sailed across the Atlantic, if they came deep enough into the Gulf of Mexico, well, the imperial and seafaring power of the Gulf of Mexico at that time was the Olmec civilization. They would have had probably traders and ambassadors all over the Gulf of Mexico. We know that the Olmecs had contact with the Maya people in Belize in just 50 BC, because in 50 BC, the Maya people attempt to establish a kingdom that is very clearly inspired by the Olmecs. I'm assuming that these connections had been around since long before that. Olmecs were commissioning jade and serpentine out of the deep jungles of Guatemala in 500, 600 BC, all the way back to 1000 BC. So this Olmec trade network was well established across all of the Mesoamerican world, and had the Phoenicians arrived in the Mesoamerican world in 600 BC, they would have quickly been introduced to the Olmec king who was living at the time. So I can't say with 100% of certainty here, but if we're looking for evidence of an ancient person from the old world, or from the Mediterranean in particular, being, let's call it, featured in a cameo within the Native American world, Monument 13, the Traveler, might just be it. Now, secondly, there are all kinds of theories about Africans arriving in the Americas prior to Columbus. And I just want to say this outright. I have absolutely no doubt that there definitely were very capable seafaring people living in Africa who sailed across the Atlantic and made contact with people in the Americas. Now, do I think that they began civilizations here? Well, we don't really have evidence of that. And do I think that they carried out continuous trading back and forth? No, because these Africans would have brought back corn and potatoes from the Americas, and they would have absolutely blossomed and exploded across Africa. But do I think that they had contact with each other and perhaps to some extent knew about each other? Do I think that Africans knew about this land that was far, far away across the Atlantic Ocean? And do I think that had people living on it? And do I think that those people living there, the Native Americans or the people living among the Caribbean islands, were aware that if they sailed far enough to the east that they would run into another great landmass with dark-skinned people on it? Yes, I do. I find that very likely that they at least knew of each other. But as far as Africans coming over and establishing civilizations anywhere in the Americas, this goes the same for the people of Easter Island, the Vikings, and the Phoenicians as well. There is no evidence of people traveling across into the Americas and essentially colonizing the Americas before the arrival of Columbus in 1492. I just don't think that civilization was at that level to begin colonization at that level prior to the very early colonial period or the end of the Middle Ages. And I should also quickly add that Strabo, another one of our ancient sources, writes about the fact that during late ancient times in the middle of the Iron Age, there were around 300 Phoenician settlements off the western coast, the Atlantic coast of Iberia. Now, the Phoenicians were all seafaring people, very capable sailors. That's quite a lot of seafaring settlements on the Atlantic coast to have never crossed the Atlantic Ocean and done a little poking around and perhaps trading with the Native American people. But why we don't find evidence of that in Iberia? Well, it could be that the evidence that there ever was is just so scant it perhaps was already destroyed, or the planting of corn and potatoes perhaps didn't go well. I guess this could also be the case for African traders as well. We don't have hard evidence, but it seems like something that is likely to have occurred at least once. Now, when Columbus arrived in the Bahamas and then moved further down into the heart of the Caribbean, and he was speaking to the Carib and Taino people, he did hear stories of dark-skinned sailing tribes or civilizations or peoples who had come from further in the east, further than the Caribbean islands, and had traded with the Caribbean people, the Tainos, or people who were contemporaneous with the Tainos, and had given them and traded with them these metal-tipped alloys. Now, this alloy, as far as I know, is something that is not found anywhere in the Caribbean and isn't found in a great abundance in South America. But where it is found is on the western coast of Africa. And what the Taino and the Caribbean people told the Spaniards that this metal alloy was called, per the dark-skinned sailing tribe, was called guanine. Now, you can find this metal alloy in pre-Columbian times being used on the west coast of Africa. And linguistic anthropologists who have studied this have found that there are names of metal alloys in certain cultures that have become obscure in the modern day, but were not obscure during ancient times, calling this metal alloy guanine. So we have this fascinating anomaly here that seems to have some kind of connection. Guanine and guanine. Could be some connection here. Regardless, though, I think it's very likely that even though ancient African civilizations are very often underestimated in their intellect and capability, I just find it incredibly likely that there was at the very least some kind of limited trading and exploration being done on the part of Africans sailing across the Atlantic and perhaps poking around on the eastern and Atlantic coast of the Americas and the Caribbean. If you guys have ever seen any other key pieces of evidence of the Phoenicians or the Africans poking around and exploring the Americas, please leave them in the comment section below. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like more videos on the history and mysteries of places all around the world, well, please like and subscribe for more.